And Gail, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Lori. I'm so excited to be here. My story is that we lived in upstate New York and had been invited to visit neighbors for a grown-up tea party, my mom and me. And at the time, I was a friendly 2.5-year-old. We were playing outside in the fall leaves that were really brightly colored, and we could smell the fresh baked cookies coming out of the oven through the screen door. So we ran in the house and I started to boost myself up from a bench. The table was like a picnic bench. And so I started to boost myself up onto the table using my elbows. And of course, I spotted a cookie sitting on the table and I reached for it, spilling a fresh brewed pot of coffee off the table and all over me. It burned 40% of my body with 3rd-degree burns. I was hospitalized for months. My parents didn't have any kind of support like there is today. It was 1956. So I'm now 67 years old and literally within the last less than 18 months have come out of hiding. My mom, things were very different back then. My mom recounted to me the one and only time we've ever talked about the accident happening was last January. And she recounted to me, after asking me what I remembered, she recounted that she had walked back into the room after being gone for a little while to witness a nurse slapping me to try to get me to stop crying. And of course that didn't happen, and it would not likely ever happen in this day and age. So again, it tells you a lot about how things have changed. Let's see, I made some notes because it's just so much easier for me than just to talk. But so my healing was quite a struggle for me. As I said, we never really talked about it. There was no support. My burns and resulting emotional and physical scars have stayed with me this whole time, but really receded in the background. I became afraid of everyone and everything. I felt ashamed. Even though no one could see my scars, I saw, or thought, I guess I saw myself as I thought people saw me, with a disfigurement, with low self-esteem, being ashamed of my body. Having no support, obviously, no one told my parents or me as I grew up what to expect. So as I was healing, the scars were really itchy and I scratched even though I wasn't supposed to, and they bled. I remember very vividly waking up in bloody sheets. I remember having to toss my stuffed animal Tigger into the trash because bleach wouldn't fix him anymore. I remember as an adolescent, really some difficult times. I went to one slumber party and everyone knew I was different because I didn't change with all the girls. I went into the bathroom and changed. I always got undressed, ready for gym class in the private stalls. I never went clothing shopping with friends because I wouldn't change in front of them. And shopping in the early 60s, mid 60s was really difficult because unlike now where there's really soft, really nice fabrics, most of the clothes then were really rough cotton. And so they irritated my scars. And in fact, I wore a t-shirt. Like today, a lot of women and girls wear camis. We didn't have camisoles. So I wore a t-shirt much of the time under my clothes to protect my burns and scars. Dating was a nightmare for me, as you can well imagine. First and second dates were fine. But after that, as guys would try to get more friendly, I would run. I also had no self-confidence, lots of self-image issues. I even covered the mirrors in my bedroom so I didn't really have to look at myself. We had no medical insurance, unlike today where a lot of people are covered. My parents were not covered. So my dad paid off my medical bills $5 a week for over 3 years. Imagine. I mentioned that I had phobias, or maybe I didn't, but the burns and scarring gave me phobias. I was afraid of everything, and some of my phobias were rational, some of them are irrational. They included fire and water, heights and blood, and public speaking and crawly things. I don't know if you all know, but the number one fear in the world that people have is public speaking. My professional career was in healthcare leadership. I did that for about 35 years, managing large hospital departments, big multi-specialty medical practices, and I did clinical research trial auditing across the country. Some of my self-esteem was built during that job. There was no GPS, there were no cell phones. I can't tell you how large the laptops were that we had to lug on and off planes. And we traveled solo. So I learned to rely on myself to get myself to an airport, get a rental car, drive to a hotel, eat by myself, stay overnight by myself, and speak in public to professors in the medical arena about the trials that they were doing, speak with patients, speak with nursing staff. And so I learned a lot and I grew a lot. How I came out of hiding was quite by accident and really a slip of my own tongue. I created my own business. It's an image consulting company that does career coaching, and I started it about 4 years ago when I retired from the healthcare world. And to launch my business, I decided to have a fundraising fashion show. So year 2 was great. It was very lightly attended, but it was a great experience learning for me, getting sponsors, having entertainment, the whole 9 yards. It was a 3.5-hour event. And I knew I wanted it to benefit someone. So it was a fundraiser and it benefited Beads of Courage. I don't know if you know Beads of Courage. It was founded here in Tucson and is an internationally renowned not-for-profit that supports seriously injured or sick kids and their families. And the kids collect beads based on whatever treatment they're receiving. So Jean, the founder, was my guest and my beneficiary. And after working with her for about 18 months, year 2, we were behind stage before going to the podium. And I said to her, so where have you been lately? Knowing that usually she's in Japan and China and Australia and Canada and heaven knows where in the US. And she said, interestingly, I really haven't traveled much, but the last 3 days, I was working with the burn center at Children's Phoenix Hospital. Before I could get a word out, the MC was calling me to the podium. So I left behind stage. And the way I speak generally in public, I always have my script. It's like my blankie. It's not that I read it, but it helps with my confidence being in front of people. So I had my speech and I was ready to start introductions. And instead I paused a moment and realized I had tears running down my face. There were 200 people in the room. And I said, speaking from my heart, I'm so excited to have Jean and Beads of Courage as our beneficiary again this year. I'll be bringing her out to introduce her again in just a minute. But as you may know, Beads is international, and I asked Jean where she had just been. And she shared that she had just spent several days with children as burn victims and their parents out at Children's Phoenix Hospital. You could literally hear the gasp and then the dead silence for moments. It seemed like an hour. It was probably 10 seconds. But the only person of those 200 in the room that knew my story was my husband. So then we went on with the event. Jean came out and we had a great affair and it was lovely. And at the very end, a woman who I knew by reputation, but had never had the opportunity to meet, Kathy Bell in Tucson. She came up to me after and introduced herself and said, I don't know if you know who I am. We were the recipients 10 years ago of Extreme Home Makeover. My daughter was born with a blood cancer. I founded the Bell Family Foundation, and my daughter and I wrote her story. Can I take you to lunch? You have a story to tell. I want to hear it. I'm like, nope, don't have a story. Not interested. Thanks so much. Well, she didn't let it end there. She pursued me. And probably for the next month and a half or so, she wanted to have lunch. And I finally relented. And I said, but it's not going to get you anywhere. You know, I want to hear about you, but I'm not sharing about me. And over the course of the next 3 hours, she pulled my story very reluctantly from me. And it was through tears and laughter. The poor waiter, I still feel sorry for him. But I shared my story. And at the end, she said, you need to put this in a book. Kids need to read this, but not just kids, parents of the kids, of the survivors, and adult survivors, because it's inspirational, motivational. And my husband is a journalist, has been an author ×3, and he's always been the writer in the family. And I'm like, not me. So fast forward a few months, January of 2019, my sister and I had plans to go visit my mom in Florida. We flew out and I preempted the flight by emailing my mom and just saying, I've been asked to share my story, Mom. I want to talk to you about it. Because as I said, we had never talked about it as a family. So my sister and I land and we have a drink or two in the first evening. And so Mom was like, so tell me. And so together we started piecing together what we all remembered of my story. And I went home and I started writing, but not really dedicated. And COVID hit basically in the middle to end of February. My business pretty much dried up. And I said to my husband one night, how do you write? Like, I've written policies and procedures and all kinds of stuff, but I'd never written a story. And he said, just sit at the computer and type. Just type. Don't reread it. Don't edit it. Don't think, okay, chapter 1 is this and chapter 4 is this and I'll end this way. Just write. And I did for the next several weeks. And then I got brave. I did not share it with my husband, but I shared it with a teacher who I'm very close to back east. I shared it with a child psychologist, and I shared it with a dear friend who's an editor. And all the feedback was amazing. Oh, and Kathy Bell shared it with her 2 nieces who are teenagers, 14 and 16, I think. And all the feedback was amazing. You have to do this, get it done. And so I started submitting it to traditional publishing houses. And I got 2 rejections, and that's okay. And I reached out to a hybrid publisher, and I reached out to the owner, Angela, and I got a response within 2 hours. And she said, I have to be the one to publish your book because my son was burned as an infant. And so my story's now been published. In the book, I share stories, some of which I talked about having phobias. One of my phobias was snakes. Knowing I was going to move to the desert, I knew I'd run across them. I had no idea how many I would run across. Found them in my pool, found one in my house. But I was afraid of them to the point where I could not open one of those little kids' golden books that have pictures of all kinds of animals in it. I couldn't open a Sunday newspaper that showed in the spring that garter snakes were coming out or that the rattlers were coming out. Couldn't touch the page with the snake on it. I have 2 nephews And when they were young, we'd spend a lot of time at their house, and they loved everything alive. They'd bring fish and snakes and everything else to the house. And I remember being at their house one afternoon, and one of them tried to put a garter snake, rubber snake, in my face, and I ran screaming. My sister freaked and put the rubber snake on the top of the refrigerator, and it slid down the refrigerator like a real snake. I left. I don't think I visited my sister for a month. I knew moving out here I had to do something, and I found a PhD student at the University of Albany, New York, who is doing his thesis on adult phobias. And he told me that he was doing classes one-on-one, 6-week classes, and he could get me over my fear. It's like, okay. It was done on a sliding fee scale. We didn't have a lot of money, so we agreed on a price. I will guess it took me about 4 months to pass that course. He didn't charge me a penny. He learned a lot, and so did I. I don't remember his name, but I remember his beautiful orange corn snake named Max, that at graduation I could reach into the terrarium, pick him up gently, wrap him around my arm, smile at him, and put him back in his tank. So from that, through exposure, right? I had to touch paper. I had to touch rubber snakes. My homework assignment once was to bring a rubber snake home. I wouldn't let him put it in my car. It had to go in a paper bag in my trunk. I got home. I made my husband take it out of my trunk. And after several days, Al said to me, "So you're not playing with your snake?" I'm like, "Oh no, not going to do that." He's like, "We're going to do it." And he took the snake out of the bag and he put it on our side coffee table. And my thing was, after dinner every night, Al and I had to play with that snake. The way I wound up being able to do that, my brilliant husband said, "Let's go out to the garage. Your tires are made of rubber. They're no different than this rubber snake, except they look different." And over time, I could touch the tire, rub my hand over my car tire, and hold the rubber snake and forget that it looked like a snake. So I learned through exposure and breathing techniques that I could overcome a lot. I've overcome my fear of heights. I'm still afraid of things. I don't do well with fire. I won't light a match. I don't like sparklers. But I've learned that I can get by still knowing that I'm an okay person, even though I'm still healing. And I've learned that sharing is healing for me, and hopefully the people in this room as well. And so I don't know if you have questions, or if you, I don't know.